You know you have built an unusual aircraft when even your own pilots say, "Wait a second, where the hell did they put the engine?" Hi everyone and welcome back to the Jaxom Talks channel. This is the story of the Bell P-39 Airacobra, the mid-engined, cannon-armed oddball that everyone thought would flop, until it didn't. If you ask most aviation fans about the P-39 Airacobra, you'll usually hear one of two things. Either, yes, that terrible American fighter nobody wanted, or you get, oh, isn't that the one the Russians loved for some reason? And both of those answers are sort of right. But today, we're going to talk about why the P-39 wasn't a failure, why it has been misunderstood, and why it might actually be one of the most context-dependent combat aircraft of the Second World War. To understand the P-39, we need to rewind it back to 1937, when the US Army Air Corps wanted something new, not just a faster version of the old biplane logic, they wanted innovation. Bell Aircraft, a young and hungry company, said, well, what if we ignored tradition entirely? They pitched a radical idea. Let's put the engine right behind the pilot, stick a giant 37mm cannon through the propeller hub, and call it progress. To make that work, Bell engineers moved the engine behind the pilot, connected to the propeller by a long drive shaft that ran under the cockpit floor. Yes, you were sitting on top of a spinning metal shaft at several thousand RPM. But against all the odds, the Army Air Corps said, sure, why not? And gave them the go-ahead. The first XP-39 prototype took to the air in 1939. It was sleek, futuristic, and fast for the times. The test flights hit nearly 390 miles per hour. The Army was thrilled. But then, bureaucracy arrived. Engineers decided to remove the turbo and supercharger that gave the plane its high-altitude power, supposedly to simplify production. Translation: they just made a top-tier interceptor that couldn't intercept much above 15,000 feet. The Army Air Corps at the time believed most combat would happen at low to medium altitude. This turned out to be, well, optimistic at best. Without a turbo and supercharger, the P-39's performance collapsed above 12,000 feet, and in Europe, altitude was everything. The German fighters always fought from height, dropping down and attacking from above, and by doing this they would always be in control of the engagement. Production models of the P-39C rolled off the line in 1941. She was looking like a Hollywood starlet, nose cannon, machine guns, tricycle landing gear. It even had a side-opening car door. Pilots could literally drive to work, climb in, and open their door like they were pulling up to a diner. It handled beautifully while taxiing on the ground, but in the air, that near-neutral balance made it twitchy. Think of it like a sports car in the sky, except if you pulled a little too hard, it would bite back. Now with modern avionics, a twitchy and unstable airframe is an absolute design choice, as it makes for a very maneuverable fighter, but this takes a lot of computer assistance to make it safe for the pilot. The center of gravity of the P-39 shifted dangerously as ammo was fired. It had a tendency to enter flat spins and handling characteristics that punished sloppy pilots. In short, the Airacobra was not a forgiving airframe. The P-39 entered US service in 1941, just in time for America to realize, oh, this isn't really what we wanted. US pilots found that it struggled against Bf-109s and Fokker-Wulf 190s at altitude. It also lacked the range for long escort missions, and as mentioned, it demanded careful handling. In combat over North Africa, the Mediterranean and the Pacific theaters, the Airacobra achieved mixed results at best. In the Pacific, it actually performed a bit better. Why, you may ask? Well, this was because Japanese air combat often happened at a lower altitude, especially in turn fight engagements against lightly armored aircraft. They fought in the steaming jungles of New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, where high-altitude combat meant only about 5,000 feet, because that's how far you could see before hitting the cloud base. Down low, the Airacobra shined. The 37mm cannon could shred bombers or damage ships and probably knock down a tree line or two just to make a point, but above 15,000 feet, Japanese Zeros could dance circles around it, leaving P-39 pilots muttering words we can't repeat on YouTube. The Royal Air Force also tried some Airacobras, calling them the Airacobra Mark I. They loved the extra punch and firepower. For about 5 minutes. Then they realized German bombers flew at altitudes where the P-39 began gasping for air like a goldfish out of its bowl. The RAF politely returned most of the order. In translation, thanks America, but we'll stick with the Spitfires and Hurricanes. And so the US Army Air Corps decided, we need to give this troublesome airframe to someone else, enter the Soviet Union. If the P-39 ever had a redemption arc, this is where it begins. Here's where our story gets interesting. Under the Lend-Lease program, Literally boatloads of P-39s were shipped to the Soviet Union, about 4,700 units in total. The Soviets opened the crates, looked at this odd American fighter, and said, "This is perfect. This plane is for low altitude, and that's exactly where we love to fight." On the Eastern Front, battles were mainly fought under 15,000 feet, exactly the P-39's comfort zone. The Soviets didn't need high-altitude escort fighters, long-range bombers, or air superiority over Germany itself. What they needed was low-altitude battlefield dominance, ground attack or fighter interception close to the front. All of a sudden, the Airacobra made perfect sense. Soviet fighter ace, Alexander Pokrishkin, made the P-39 legendary. He racked up 59 aerial victories, almost all of them in this so-called failed plane. His secret: he rewrote air combat tactics, moving away from tight heroic dogfights toward flexible pairs and formations, using the Airacobra's fast dive and heavy punch to hit hard and get out. Pokrishkin helped develop new tactical doctrines around the aircraft in the form of energy fighting at medium altitude, boom and zoom tactics, and coordinated formations. He reportedly refused to fly anything else for long periods. The Soviets didn't see the Airacobra as bad. They saw it as a specialist tool to be used correctly. They did tweak it a bit when needed. Sometimes they would remove the wing guns to save weight, because when you're trying to outclimb a Bf-109, every ounce of weight counts. The Soviet pilots who flew the plane joked that the P-39 was built by an engineer who loved pilots. It had good radio gear, a comfy cockpit, and it even had heating, an absolute luxury in the Eastern Front winter. The mid-engine layout also meant if someone shot you from the rear, the giant Allison V-12 behind your seat acted as additional personal armor. You might not enjoy being shot at, but at least you could keep your seat warm while it happened. Back in the West, though, the P-39's reputation never recovered. Pilots complained it spun out too easily, which, to be fair, it could. The mid-engine design put the center of gravity awkwardly close to your spine. Lose too much speed and you might find the sky spinning faster than your altimeter could keep track. That said, well-trained pilots appreciated its low-level agility. It wasn't a dogfighter for operating at 30,000 feet, but over the front lines or strafing enemy convoys, it was a pure menace. The Airacobra got typecast as a second-rate air-to-air fighter, but its versatility kept it in combat from New Guinea to Stalingrad. As a ground attack platform, it knocked out tanks, strafed trail lines, escorted bombers, and occasionally, just for fun, shot up enemy troop barges. So let's look at some stats and hit some numbers before the engineers in the comments section revolt. Powerplant-wise, it had an Allison 517-1085 engine, producing around 1200 horsepower. For armament, it carried one 37mm cannon, two 50 caliber machine guns in the nose, two 30 caliber machine guns in each wing, and sometimes a bomb or rocket slung underneath. Now let's talk about that cannon. The 37mm T9 cannon was a game changer. While other fighters were peppering enemies with machine guns, the P-39 was lobbing miniature artillery shells. A single hit from that nose cannon could tear a Ju-88 in half, or turn a supply truck into a smoking crater. It was perfect for ground attack missions, a role the Soviets desperately needed filling. They called it the Little Cobra, and they absolutely loved it. It hit a speed of roughly 360 miles per hour at 15,000 feet and had a range of about 600 miles, well, on a good day with a tailwind. It had a potential ceiling of 35,000 feet, but in reality you would require a prayer getting there without oxygen. The car door cockpit layout was great for visibility, but less so for bailing out. Many pilots admitted they preferred not testing that feature. The P-39's role wasn't just about combat. It was diplomacy on wings. The Lend-Lease deliveries of the Airacobra was one of the items that helped knit the uneasy alliance between the US and Soviet Union. It was physical proof that cooperation, even between ideological opposites, could work, especially when Germans were shooting at you. Soviet propaganda even hailed the Airacobra as a symbol of American-Soviet friendship. A friendship that would chill into the Cold War faster than a Siberian winter once the conflict ended. Statistically, the P-39 earned serious respect. Soviet units flying the type reportedly downed over 12,000 Axis aircraft that made up a massive proportion of the total Luftwaffe losses on the entire Eastern Front. So, while the West wrote it off as an also-ran, the East quietly used it to grind down one of history's most dangerous air forces. Enter the King Cobra. Bell attempted to fix the P-39's flaws with the P-63 King Cobra. Think of it as the Airacobra 2.0. Same weird looks, but with a stronger engine and sleeker wings. This was a case of too little, too late for US Army Air Corps, but the Soviets again said, yes please. The King Cobra would fight all the way through to the war's end and even into the early Cold War, proof that the design philosophy wasn't as crazy as everyone thought. For all its quirks, pilots who mastered the Airacobra remembered it fondly. Ground crews loved how easy it was to service. The landing gear arrangement made for smooth landings and easy taxiing, a small blessing after hours flying over enemy lines. There is something charming about an airplane that scared the hell out of rookies, baffled engineers, but earned the lifelong loyalty of those who cracked its code and flew it into battle. They might not have been pretty at altitude, but at treetop level, it was an artist with a machine gun. When World War II ended, the P-39s faded quickly from US service. Many were sold, scrapped, or sent to Latin American allies. In Cuba and Guatemala, old Airacobras kept flying into the early 1950s like classic cars that just refused to die. Somewhere out there was probably a mechanic saying, "I told you that mid-engine idea would catch on." Despite its mixed reputation, the Airacobra left fingerprints all over modern aviation. Its landing gear layout set the standard for future fighters. Its nose-mounted cannon was one of the planes that inspired modern centerline gun layouts. And its mid-engine balance gave a preview of the design logic used by jet aircraft. The Bell team even carried lessons from this plane into the P-59 Airacobra, America's first jet fighter. So yes, it was a weird one that was a bit ahead of its time. So the next time you hear about the great fighters of World War II, like the Spitfire or the Mustang, spare a thought for the quirky, mid-engined underdog that nobody wanted. The P-39 Airacobra might have been a flop in the West, but on the Eastern Front, it became a legend, a testament to how the right machine in the right hands can change the course of a war. It reminds us that there's no such thing as the best plane in a vacuum, only the right plane for the right battlefield. So, was the Bell P-39 Airacobra a success or a failure? Maybe both. It was ambitious, flawed, and utterly unique. A fighter that literally turned aviation inside out. Loved in Russia, doubted in America, but remembered everywhere. Adventurous engineers still ask, what if we tried something crazy? I hope you have enjoyed this dip into what is without a doubt one of the more unique airframes of the Second World War. If you enjoyed learning how one of the strangest fighters of World War II earned its wings, hit like, subscribe, and let me know what aircraft you want me to cover next. Thanks for watching, and I will see you on the next video.